Hi, welcome again. I'm Dustin Perry. I'm the CEO of Kingfisher Metals, and today I'm talking about our recent results from the Thibert Project. So Thibert is really our secondary gold asset in northwestern British Columbia. Haven't talked about it a lot. Gold Range really is our priority, but Thibert is a really interesting project, and the work we've done this year is really framework studies, airborne magnetics, and regional stream sediment sampling. And this, combined with the historic data, has really allowed us to put together a really solid picture for what we believe is a project that has the potential for multiple significant gold discoveries. The Thibert Project is host. The area around the Thibert Project is host to a placer district that's produced over 200,000 ounces of gold. And the structure that runs right through the project that was clearly identified by our airborne magnetic survey is what we believe has caused this gold mineralization, this massive crustal scale structure, the Thibert fault. So without further ado, I'll get into it and run you through a short presentation explaining these results and giving you a bit more background on our project. So as I noted, Thibert is located in northwestern BC. You can see on this map where our Gold Range project is located to the south in the Yalkin Gold Belt. Thibert is located on the Teslin-Thibert Fault, which is a crustal scale fault. It separates oceanic rocks within the Cache Creek terrain from island arc rocks in the Quesnel terrain. A lot of people might be familiar with the Quesnel terrain. A lot of large porphyry deposits sit in it further down in central British Columbia. So what we're seeing here is a deep structure that's been modeled. It goes right through the lithosphere. It's an excellent conduit for fluid. And we have a lot of gold in the area. So the mineralization here is likely Cretaceous. That's what we believe. The fault appears to be the same age as a lot of other significant structures. One thing we notice here at our Thibert project versus Gold Range is the level of gold, the formation level was likely deeper. So we believe it's mesozonal here. And it has a lot of similarities with well-known gold camps, such as the Juno Gold Camp, where Grand Portage is currently drilling, also down in the Motherlode district in California. A lot of similarities between these. One of them is you're just closer to a major structure and you get these fatter veins, whereas the epizonal environment at Gold Range indicates you're on subsidiary faults and you get a more rectangular shape to the area of mineralization. One isn't better than the other, you just target things a little differently. So Thibert now is 130 square kilometers. We staked a few more claims this year. The project covers 27 kilometers of this regional crustal scale fault. The area around this fault has produced over 200,000 ounces of gold since the 1870s. And nobody has ever really systematically looked at this before. Noranda did a bit of poking around in the 80s, I believe, but nobody has done this framework kind of study, which we have with the regional magnetic survey, compiling all the stream sediment samples. We acquired this project off Kennerland, and they completed a LiDAR survey and surficial geology map. So we've got everything in place now to start focusing in on smaller areas and doing more refined ground-based geophysical surveys, geochemical surveys, and then leading to scout drilling, which might happen next summer. So as I touched on, we're on this major fault located close to infrastructure. So we're right off the highway. The Stewart-Cassar Highway here goes right from the terrace area all the way up to the Yukon. I've worked on it quite a bit, spent a lot of my career there. Dease Lake has an airport just south of there. A lot of workforce. You're in Tahltan country there, so they're very experienced with mining and quite supportive. We do have a communications agreement in place with the Tahltan First Nation. So I touched on how we're in a placer district and we've got a great fault running right through the project, which is likely responsible for it, but there's no known lode occurrence that has been discovered yet through drilling. That's where we see the opportunity here. We've got the right geology, everything makes sense, but there hasn't been a major discovery yet in this camp. And if you look at this chart here, which you can find in our presentation on our website, you can see that there's a discrepancy here versus all the other camps. Lode occurrences have been discovered, whereas at Thibert, there just hasn't been. And one of the issues is the till cover masking the signatures on the project. but also it just hasn't seen a lot of exploration. So that's something we're hoping to change here, and we do think the project represents an excellent discovery opportunity. So this is the project looking in a lot closer now. You can see within the claim block, the topography is a little more refined because of the LiDAR survey that was completed. The white squares in here, which you might have to look on our present on the news release to see a little closer, but those are placer claims, and then you can see our claims around it. You can see the crustal scale shear, the Thibert fault running through the project. And one thing to note is these shears, they're not a single line like you might often see on a map, but it's actually a broad zone of deformation where you'll have multiple faults and multiple veins running through a corridor. And this area here really does coincide with areas of gold mineralization. You can see the yellow creeks on here are creeks that had active placer, or that had placer production dating back to the 1870s until now, because there's active placer claims here and people working on the project. But you can also see these areas in orange, which were clearly visible areas of placer mining from high resolution, so 20 centimeter resolution LiDAR imagery. Some of these have been confirmed in the field as well last summer by our field crews. Another thing to point out here is the lack of drilling. There's only 2 areas that have seen a very small amount of drilling, just over 1,000 meters of drilling in 7 holes. So this area really hasn't been explored through drilling yet. So there's a few things that I need to touch on here that are really interesting that caught my eye. So there are 3 areas with anecdotal results that really speak volumes because of where they sit in relation to all our other data. So the Default Creek Placer Camp really encompasses this area up in here. You know, pretty big nuggets have come out of this area, up to 22 ounces as documented by a government official in the 1878 BC Annual Mines Report. And they said there was reports of even bigger nuggets, but they hadn't confirmed them, but multiple nuggets over 10 ounces. So we're seeing really coarse gold. And the one thing to keep in mind is all the gold seen in this camp is always associated with quartz. So it probably hasn't traveled that far. It's coming in quartz veins. So where are those quartz veins? And they're likely within this shear zone. Right next door to that, so upstream of Default Creek and also upstream of Porcupine Creek, sits the Ficklin prospect. So this I've read about in an older assessment report, and there was a prospector who supposedly found a 100-pound angular quartz boulder where he recovered 60 ounces of gold from. I did the calculation before. It's just a ridiculous number. Keep in mind it is an anecdote, but they did find the program by Equity Mines in '89. They went and found the cabin from this prospector in this pass between these 2 placer drainages. He had tried to find the source of this, just didn't find it. You know, looking by hand, likely a bit of till cover in the area, but it makes sense. It's right between the headwaters of 2 placer streams, and the geochem signature we've shown there from stream sediment sampling is incredibly high. And then further down to the southeast, in the Keystone showing, which is right on Thibert Creek, you know, this is right in an area of major placer workings. Back in 1931, placer miners got to the bottom of a pit where they hit bedrock, and they sampled 9.1 grams over 12 meters. So very encouraging. It has not been confirmed, but it makes sense that it would be there. You know, you've got a lot of placer workings in that area. So all these clues have us interested, but again, we haven't verified them. So something to keep in mind. The stream sediment survey we completed last year, a lot of good new data, but also there was a lot of good historic data. You can see on this map areas highlighted with a white area around the geochemical symbol indicate they were taken by us this year. So some highlights from this survey would include basically 1/4 of a gram there, 1.5 grams here, almost 50 ppb, 30 ppb. So these are high values. These are 95th percentile based on this survey. And they sit in good locations. So these areas are draining areas within this shear zone. But what I really like is what we're seeing in this area to the northwest. So these samples out here are from an area with no placer mining. So there's likely no contamination. Placer miners went pretty much everywhere. So there could be a bedrock source over here. But then this area, so this stream here, a historic stream, is draining this area, and this stream here is draining this area, and then this stream over here is draining this area. So this area in here has a lot of these good anecdotal points, but it also has a really strong stream sediment signature. And I'm going to get into what some preliminary conclusions we're making from the magnetics on the following slide. But the big point to drum home here is there's a lot of gold anomalism across this 27-kilometer long project now. Really encouraging, and we're seeing the gold anomalies in the right places. We still have gold anomalies down to the southeast, but one thing to note, they're a little bit more subdued in the Keystone area where you see all the placer workings in the eastern part of the project. And what we believe this might be is it might be indicative of the placer source actually being right underneath it. So it might actually indicate that the placer gold is buried underneath old tailings in the bottom of the creek here. But either way, there's a lot of good targets here, but we were able to kind of refine a few of our areas. So we've got a smaller search area now, which is the whole point of these regional surveys. So the magnetics, that's the final piece of this framework study we did this year. And what we like is that there's different bends and cross structures highlighted in this survey. And cross structures are often places where it's a really good place to put metal for fluid flow. They can focus fluid flow, but also allow for fluid flow. You can see a bend in this right down here that coincides perfectly with where the keystone showing is. You can see cross structures running through here that have been offsetted by the shear zone. There's a lot of different things going on in here, but one thing that we like is that these ultramafic intrusions that were mapped by the BC Geological Survey are highlighted quite well by this survey. Ultramafic intrusions are often really magnetic, and we're seeing a major magnetic signature in the middle here that we believe might indicate that they're actually more prevalent than the BC Geological Survey thought. And part of that is, they're mapping outcrop, but there's a lot of till cover here. So the actual bedrock geology is masked in many parts of this project. And that's the whole point of doing airborne magnetics, is to see through the cover. And what we're seeing here indicates that they're likely more ultramafics than we had thought. And that bodes really well for gold mineralization. Across the world, many gold deposit, orogenic gold systems are associated with ultramafic host rocks. Just the amount of magnetic, of mafic minerals in the ultramafics, lots of iron, really helps with gold deposition. But another thing we're seeing here is we're seeing mapped ultramafics to the northwest across this shear zone. And it's a little too early to make any conclusions, but we see a more subdued signature going across here. And this happens to coincide with our area of our strongest gold mineralization in stream sediment samples, plus really good anecdotal points and known workings, known placer workings. So what I'm interested in here is often alteration can demagnetize rocks, and you're seeing it over a broad area here, over 10 kilometers. And given the geochemical signatures, I could imagine there being a significant demagnetizing alteration event that could actually be that big and would indicate a really large gold system. It is upstream of all the elder placer workings, so it does fit, and it's a great target. So because of this survey, we staked a few more claims, got the project up to approximately 130 square kilometers. Now we've got this framework in place, and we can look into it further, probably do some detailed inversions on the magnetics, and then start planning a program for this summer, which will likely involve really just coming up with a solid 3D model for the project, which will help us focus our exploration efforts in the future. And that's something Gail, our VPX, will be putting more time into. Unfortunately, she couldn't join me today as she's in a course, and I wanted to get this done, but I'm sure there'll be more from her on this in the near future. So there's one last point I'd like to make here, and it's just to really compare this project to our Gold Range project. So I've used this slide before. when we announced our initial results at Gold Range. And one thing to keep in mind here is just the different depth levels of what we're looking at and how the veins would look differently. So at Cloud Drifter and much of the Gold Range project, we're up in the really high level epizonal regime. And one of the things you'll notice there is you've got brittle rocks and you've got just more widespread veining and brecciated and stockwork textures, but over a more rectangular surface area. Whereas when you get down into the mesozonal environment, on this graphic before we had used Braylorn here, but now we can use Thibert because it's really in the similar environment. It's deeper, and you're really just hunting for a much more linear vein where you're targeting, say, one significant structure. There might be a few veins within it, but it's a much more narrow search area. Whereas at Gold Range, we get that broader area, just being closer to the Earth's crust at the time of formation. So a few things to consider. One thing to consider, a lot of the time, these mesozonal systems, I believe, might be easier to hit because you're focusing on one point and hitting it with offensive drill holes. Whereas at Gold Range, you've got a wider area. So it takes more drilling to find the real sweet spot. So some things to consider. Either way, really interesting target. We're really pleased with this framework study on Thibert, but don't let it dissuade you. Focus is on Gold Range, and that's where we're going to be drilling this year. But we're really pleased to have an excellent asset in our back pocket at Thibert.